In the world of combat sports, there are names that spark fear, AEW, and sometimes outright disbelief. Few fighters embody all three like Vyacheslav Datsik, the man infamously known as the Mad Russian. His legend is not simply built on his fights inside the ring, but on the unrelenting chaos of his life outside it. He was a fighter who seemed less like an athlete and more like a force of nature, wild beast set loose upon anyone unfortunate enough to stand across from him, with fire-red hair and a body that often looked more like an angry troll's than a sculpted professional athlete's. He smashed through opponents with shocking brutality, but behind his victories was a storm of criminality, prison time, and sheer madness that made him one of the most infamous figures in Russian fighting history. Born in 1980, Vyacheslav Datsik's earliest years already hinted at the whirlwind to come. As a child, he was uncontrollable, frequently throwing himself into street fights with reckless abandon. These weren't playful scuffles. By the time he was a teenager, he had suffered 16 concussions, proof of both his dangerous lifestyle and his insane persistence to never back down. His aggression was so uncontrollable that it eventually landed him on the police watch list, a sign that his violence was seen as a genuine threat to society. But fate took an unexpected turn when, at 18, Datsik discovered sports. To him, the idea of legally beating other men in the ring was irresistible, almost like being granted permission to unleash his rage in front of a cheering crowd. He didn't come to fighting with polished skills or technical precision, but he had something that could not be taught: monstrous raw power. It was this power that earned him the nickname Red Tarzan. In 1999, a year after stepping into the fight world, he found himself facing an opponent no one believed he could conquer: Andrei Arlovsky. Known as the Pitbull, Arlovsky would go on to become a UFC heavyweight champion, a man trained in the most disciplined gyms with years of combat sports expertise. On paper, the match looked like a complete mismatch: the technically skilled martial artist against the untrained, brawling child of the streets. When the bell rang, it played out exactly as expected. Arlovsky danced around Datsik, punishing him with precision strikes, battering him with kicks, and making the wild Russian look like a giant punching bag. The contrast was almost comical: Pitbull, the predator, and Red Tarzan, his helpless prey. But then, in an instant, the script was flipped. Gathering every ounce of fury in his body, Datsik unleashed a single, devastating punch that landed flush on Arlovsky's jaw. The Pitbull collapsed, sent into a dream world by the raw violence of Datsik's power. In his professional debut, this wild Russian had just destroyed a future UFC champion. It was a moment that cemented his name in infamy. Against all odds, the beast had arrived. For most fighters, such a victory would have been the start of a disciplined march to greatness. For Datsik, it was only the beginning of a spiral into madness. Unlike other athletes who focused on training, nutrition, and careers, Vyacheslav spent his free time robbing stores and committing crimes. His life was a bizarre balancing act, half in the cage, half in the underworld. Soon, his behavior caught up with him. Declared insane, he was locked away in a psychiatric hospital. But true to his chaotic nature, he escaped, fleeing illegally to Norway. There, in a bizarre twist, authorities deemed him sane and arrested him, eventually deporting him back to Russia. In total, Datsik spent 9 long years behind bars, his fighting career suspended, his reputation growing darker by the day. When he was finally released in 2019, the man who stepped back into the ring was no longer the same youthful beast. Prison had aged him, and his body looked heavier, less imposing. Yet the fire still burned in his fists. Despite his reputation, or perhaps because of it, no major organization wanted to sign him. The risk was too great, the stigma too heavy. But somehow, the Red Tarzan still found his way back into professional combat. And when he did, he reminded everyone that while he may have looked like an angry troll returning from exile, his fists still carried the power of a sledgehammer. Time and time again, he entered the ring, knocking out opponents with sheer violence. Yet, like a wild animal, his unpredictability always lingered. The man was not merely a fighter, he was a storm unleashed. Inevitably, Datsik's path collided with another infamous name, Alexander Emelianenko, brother of the legendary Fedor, in Russian sports. The Emelianenko name was sacred, a dynasty forged in the crucible of MMA greatness. Alexander, with experience against giants like Mirko Krokop, Fabricio Werdum, and Josh Barnett, was seen as the clear favorite. Surely, the wild, aging Tarzan would not stand a chance against such pedigree. But when the bell rang, the fight turned into one of the most shocking spectacles in Russian combat history. 10 seconds, that's all it took. Datsik charged forward like a mad bull, overwhelming Emelianenko with a barrage that retired the legend before the crowd could even process what they were witnessing. Once again, the Red Tarzan defied every prediction, every piece of logic, and stood victorious over a fighter who had once been untouchable. If technical fighters could not stop him, then perhaps the answer was to put him against someone equally unhinged. Enter Jonah dos Santos, a hulking giant, nicknamed the Ring Chef. notorious for turning his opponents into minced meat. At the pre-fight press conference, Dos Santos tried to play the mind game, attempting to intimidate Datsik with his words and presence. But what he failed to realize was that Datsik lived in a world far beyond intimidation. Madness was his natural state. When fight night arrived, the stage was set for a battle of beasts. The opening bell sounded, and the two collided like predators, fighting for dominance in the wild. But it quickly became clear who was the true apex predator. Datsik mauled Dos Santos, sending him crashing to the mat. Though the Brazilian giant rose to his feet, defiance in his eyes, Datsik's relentless assault buried every hope he had. Dos Santos's spirit broke, and in a moment of cowardice, he refused to continue. The Red Tarzan had shown once again that in his world, only the strongest survived, and he was the lion of the pride. Then came Antonio Bigfoot Silva, a Brazilian legend whose towering frame and monstrous size had terrorized the UFC heavyweight division. Silva was no ordinary fighter. He had defeated the likes of Fedor Emelianenko, Travis Brown, and Alistair Overeem. On paper, he was the perfect mountain to halt Datsik's resurgence. Yet, when the fight began, it was no contest. Datsik tore into Bigfoot with reckless fury, raining down punches that turned the Brazilian giant into a helpless target. Even Silva's enormous legs and size could not save him from the storm. With his guard shattered and his will broken, Bigfoot endured a carnival of pain until the inevitable end came crashing down. Datsik, standing triumphant, roared like a predator who had just devoured his prey, his madness echoing through the arena. But perhaps the strangest fight in Datsik's bizarre career was against a man named Tyson Dijon. No, not the legendary Mike Tyson, but a far smaller fighter known more for his flamboyant rooster hairstyle than his reputation. Unlike the giants Datsik had demolished, Dijon was quick, nimble, and fast with his hands. From the opening bell, he used his speed to dictate the pace, landing strikes that seemed to frustrate the lumbering Russian. Yet, while his punches touched Datsik, they did little more than anger him. The thick armor of the Red Tarzan absorbed the blows like rain on stone. Enraged, Datsik unleashed a furious counterattack, his massive fists landing with such force that they sent Dijon flying out of the ring, his body broken, his mind scattered. The message was clear: no fraud, no pretender. No flamboyant act could topple the madness of Vyacheslav Datsik. In the end, Vyacheslav Datsik remains one of the most extraordinary figures in combat sports. He is not remembered for titles, championships, or records, but for the sheer spectacle of his existence. He was the fighter who could have been among the greatest had he not sabotaged himself with crime, violence, and insanity. Instead, he became a legend of a different sort, the cautionary tale. The wild card, the mad Russian who smashed everyone in his path, yet never truly fulfilled his potential. Watching him was like watching a force of nature, terrifying, unpredictable, but impossible to look away from. So now the question falls to you. What do you make of Vyacheslav? Was he an untamed genius who might have been a champion, if not for his madness? Or was he simply a dangerous brawler who thrived on chaos? Could a fighter like him survive in today's disciplined combat world? Or was he a product of a different, darker era? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this dive into the story of the Mad Russian, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more incredible stories from the world of fighting.